The sky was on fire. Captain Elias Voss watched from the bridge of the stolen Zelvok warship as Earth burned. What had once been a beacon of human civilization was now a charred husk, its oceans boiling under relentless orbital bombardment. Billions of voices had cried out in terror. Now, there was only silence. His fists clenched, nails biting into his palm. His people, his home, gone. The Zelvok had made sure of that. "Captain," came a voice behind him. It was Lieutenant Mara Wren, her normally unshaken demeanor cracked with grief. "The fleet, it's moving out. They think we're dead." Voss turned his gaze to the holodisplay. The Zelvok dreadnoughts, their silver hulls gleaming in the flames of Earth's death, were departing. They didn't even bother searching for survivors. To them, humanity was already extinct. How wrong they were. Voss forced himself to steady his voice. "Status of the ship?" "Still operational," said Wren. "We took damage escaping the battle, but nothing critical. We've got enough supplies for a few weeks, but," she hesitated. "Sir, what do we do now?" The question hung in the air like a funeral bell. Around them, the remnants of their crew, barely 50 survivors, looked to him for guidance. Scientists, engineers, soldiers. The last flickering embers of humanity. Voss exhaled slowly. There was only one answer. "We make them pay." The words ignited something in the crew, grief twisted into rage, despair into purpose. They weren't just survivors. They were humanity's last soldiers. "We can't take on the entire empire," Wren cautioned, though her eyes burned with the same fury. "Not yet." "No," Voss agreed. "But we can bleed them. We can make them afraid." He turned to his crew. "From this moment on, we are the ghosts of humanity. The Zelvok think they've won, but we will haunt them. We will strike from the darkness. We will turn their own weapons against them. And we will never stop, until the last of them burns." The silence that followed was not one of uncertainty, but of resolve. Then, from the shadows of the bridge, a voice spoke. "Then let's get to work." It was Eric Halloway, their weapons specialist. He grinned grimly, motioning toward the ship's controls. "We've got a Zelvok warship, a crew with nothing left to lose, and a whole lot of vengeance to dish out. Where do we start?" Voss turned back to the holodisplay, eyes locked onto the departing Zelvok fleet. His heart was a furnace of wrath, his mind already planning their first strike. "Set course for their nearest supply station," he ordered. "We'll show them what happens when you try to wipe out humanity." As the stolen warship slipped into the void, the last survivors of Earth began their quest for revenge. The Zelvok Empire believed humanity was dead. Their arrogance would be their downfall. Captain Elias Voss stood at the command console of the stolen warship, now renamed Revenant, a fitting name for a ghostly vengeance. His crew had spent the past week learning the alien systems, scavenging supplies, and preparing for their first strike. "Target in sight," Lieutenant Mara Wren reported, her voice steady. The holodisplay revealed a Zelvok supply station orbiting a barren moon. It was a critical hub, distributing weapons and resources to the local sector's fleet. It was lightly guarded, just a handful of patrol ships and automated defenses. The Zelvok weren't expecting trouble. Voss smirked. "Good. Eric, status on our weapons?" Weapons specialist Eric Halloway cracked his knuckles. "We've got the plasma cannons hot and missile tubes primed. Shields at full. Ready to make a statement?" "More than ready." Voss turned to Wren. "Bring us in. Silent running until we're in range." The Revenant glided through the darkness, a predator stalking its prey. The Zelvok had grown complacent, never expecting that the very warship they had built would be used against them. Voss leaned forward. "Fire." The ship roared to life. Plasma bolts lanced through the void, tearing into the station's outer defenses. Explosions bloomed across its hull as missiles found their marks. The Zelvok panicked. Fighters scrambled to intercept, but their response was sluggish. The Revenant moved like a phantom, weaving through counterfire. Mara Wren's hands were a blur over the controls, evading return shots with precision. "We've got them rattled," Eric laughed. "They don't know what hit them." Voss wasn't smiling. "They will soon. Prepare to board." The ship docked against the burning station, and the boarding team moved in. Voss led from the front, his pulse rifle raised. The Zelvok weren't used to fighting humans in close quarters. They were larger, stronger, but slower. The ghosts of humanity struck like lightning. Eric gunned down a guard, while Wren cleared a hallway with a well-placed grenade. The Zelvok forces crumbled under the surprise assault. They stormed the command center, cutting through the last defenders. The station's commander, a Zelvok officer, cowered before them, mandibles clicking in fear. Voss stepped forward, leveling his rifle. "Tell your empire," he said coldly, "that humanity isn't extinct. We're coming for them." With a final shot, the commander fell. The ghosts of humanity had made their first move. As the Revenant pulled away from the shattered station, the Zelvok fleet would soon learn what it meant to be hunted. The first victory was small, but it had ignited something far larger. News of the Revenant's hit-and-run tactics spread through the galaxy, and whispers began to stir among the oppressed and downtrodden. Humanity was not just surviving, they were fighting back. Captain Elias Voss stood in the war room of the Revenant, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Zelvok Empire had stretched its grasp far and wide, enslaving entire populations, yet now there was a new force in play, humanity's vengeance. His crew had done their part, but Voss knew they could not win this war alone. "I've intercepted communications," Lieutenant Mara Wren reported, her voice tense. "There are survivors. Human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Hidden from the Zelvok, but not safe. The Empire's already begun hunting them down." Voss looked up, his gaze hardening. "How many?" Wren's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "A few dozen. Mostly on backwater planets, some enslaved, some hiding. But they're still human. And they're not just going to sit by." Voss made a decision in that instant. "We make contact. We bring them together." Eric Halloway, standing beside the console, grinned. "You want us to start a rebellion, Captain? Because that sounds like a hell of an idea." Voss nodded. "Exactly. We show them that the Zelvok are no gods. That we can bring them down." The Revenant made its way across the galaxy, targeting isolated colonies, worlds that had been abandoned by the Empire or were considered too insignificant to guard. Each time, they found more survivors. Some were former soldiers, others were civilians with nothing but their will to live. They all had one thing in common: they had been beaten down, but they had not broken. The ghosts of humanity didn't just offer protection, they offered something far more dangerous: hope. On the industrial world of Torvak 6, they found the first spark. The planet's inhabitants, enslaved for generations, had formed a secret underground resistance. At the head of the rebellion was Zara Kane, a former Earth Marine who had been stranded after the fall of their homeworld. Voss met her in the ruins of a forgotten city, a place where the resistance had been hiding, and Zara's hardened expression softened for the briefest moment when she saw him. "You're real," she said. "I thought the stories were just that, stories." "They're more than stories," Voss replied. "They're the truth. We're bringing humanity back. But we can't do it alone. Will you join us?" Zara didn't hesitate. "You think we can win?" "The Zelvok are everywhere." "We'll fight smarter," Voss answered. "We'll bleed them, just like we did with the supply station. Hit them where it hurts. Every time they think they're safe, we'll show them they're wrong." The resistance leaders gathered in the hidden chambers beneath the surface. Voss and his team worked with them to devise a series of guerrilla attacks, striking Zelvok patrols and supply depots across the planet. Every victory, no matter how small, was a message. The ghosts of humanity had become something more. They were the tip of the spear for a galaxy-wide uprising. Back aboard the Revenant, Eric Halloway was busy preparing a new round of strikes. He had begun to realize that human ingenuity was a far greater weapon than brute strength. Their tactics were simple but effective: divide the Zelvok, hit their weak points, and never stop moving. "This is just the beginning," Eric said, wiping grease from his hands after a successful engine tweak. "I'm getting reports from all over. The word's spreading fast. The Zelvok won't be able to keep up." Voss stood at the command deck, watching as the ships of the rebel fleet, now growing in number, assembled at the rendezvous point. The forces they had amassed were growing larger: pirates, enslaved races, and human survivors. "I think the Zelvok just woke a sleeping giant," Voss said quietly. "And they won't know what hit them." The Revenant shot forward into the stars, its crew emboldened and its mission clear. The ghosts of humanity had become a rallying cry. The Empire's stranglehold was slipping, and soon, the galaxy would know the truth: humanity was alive, and their vengeance was just beginning. The galaxy was changing, and with every passing day, the ghosts of humanity became a name that stirred fear in the hearts of the Zelvok. Their guerrilla strikes had crippled supply chains, decimated patrol fleets, and left the Empire scrambling to reassert control. Every victory, no matter how small, sent shockwaves across the stars, rallying oppressed colonies and fractured resistance groups. But now, the time for subtlety was over. Captain Elias Voss knew that in order to truly break the Zelvok, they would need to strike at the heart of their empire. To do that, they would need allies. The Revenant had become more than just a ship; it was a symbol of humanity's resolve, and the small fleet that had gathered around it represented the beginnings of a rebellion that could reshape the galaxy. Yet, despite their successes, the ghosts were still outmatched by the full might of the Zelvok war machine. Voss stood at the command deck, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. His hand rested on the ship's control panel as his mind worked through the plan he had been developing for weeks. "Captain," Mara Wren's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've intercepted a transmission. The Zelvok are consolidating their forces near the capital world of Zalcor. They're gathering to launch a final offensive against the rebellion." Voss' lips tightened into a thin line. The Zelvok had underestimated them for too long. It was time to take the fight to them. "Have the fleet ready. We're going to Zalcor." The journey to Zalcor was perilous. The Zelvok fleet had already begun to mass its forces, and the Revenant was not alone in its voyage. The rebellion had gathered a motley group of ships: mercenaries, pirates, alien refugees, and survivors from various human colonies, all willing to risk everything for a chance to bring down the oppressors. As they approached the capital world, the full scale of the Zelvok's might became apparent. A massive fleet hovered around Zalcor, its dreadnoughts and command ships forming an impenetrable wall. The planet itself was surrounded by an energy shield, an unyielding barrier that would take a heavy toll to breach. Voss stared at the enemy fleet on the tactical display, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just another raid. This was the beginning of an all-out assault. The Zelvok had made a fatal mistake: they had believed that humanity was weak, broken, and easy to crush. They had believed wrong. "Wren, deploy the fleet," Voss ordered. "We hit them where they least expect it. I want the Revenant to take the lead." Mara's fingers danced across the control panel. "Fleet is ready, Captain. We're engaging in 5, 4, 3. The ship lurched as the engines ignited, pushing the Revenant forward at breakneck speed. The rest of the rebel fleet followed, but the Zelvok were ready. Their ships moved to intercept, swarming the incoming forces with coordinated precision. "Brace for impact," Wren shouted. The first wave of Zelvok warships opened fire. Plasma cannons and energy beams ripped through the darkness, striking the rebel ships with brutal force. The Revenant shook violently under the barrage, but Voss gritted his teeth. This was what they had trained for. This was their moment. "Return fire," Voss commanded. Eric Halloway's voice crackled through the comm: "Captain, we've got incoming bombers, 10 clicks out. We can't outrun them." Voss clenched his jaw. "We don't need to outrun them. Deploy countermeasures and prepare the ambush. The Revenant turned sharply, evading the first round of missiles and releasing a cloud of chaff and flares. The Zelvok bombers, intent on their target, didn't notice the smaller rebel ships hiding in the shadows, waiting to pounce. As the bombers closed in, the rebel ships opened fire, tearing the enemy bombers to pieces in a flash of light. It was chaos. The rebel fleet was taking heavy losses, but they had managed to land a few critical blows. The Zelvok were faltering, unable to predict where the next strike would come from. The tide was beginning to turn. On the surface of Zalcor, the ground forces were ready. The ghosts of humanity had trained the rebellion's soldiers in tactics that played to their strengths: stealth, precision, and the element of surprise. When the time came, they would storm the planet itself. But for now, the fight above the planet's atmosphere was far from over. "Captain!" Ren shouted over the comm, "we're through their defense lines. The shield's down." Voss didn't hesitate. "All ships, prepare for the assault. We hit the capital next." The Revenant roared forward, slipping past the wreckage of the Zelvok fleet and plunging toward the surface of Zalcor. For the first time, the ghosts of humanity had forced the Empire to retreat, and they were about to make their enemies pay. The heart of the Zelvok Empire was about to feel the wrath of humanity. The skies over Zalcor were ablaze with the wreckage of ships, Zelvok and rebel alike. The battle had reached its fever pitch, and the fate of the planet now rested on the shoulders of the ghosts of humanity. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Revenant, staring down at the capital world below, the once proud home of the Empire that had believed they could conquer all. Now, it was on the brink of collapse, and the fight was far from over. "Captain," Lieutenant Mara Ren said, her voice tight with urgency, "we've got enemy reinforcements inbound. At least 30 warships on an intercept course. We can't outrun them." Voss clenched his jaw, his mind racing. The Revenant was a symbol, a weapon, but it wasn't invincible. If the Zelvok reinforcements arrived before they could finish their mission, everything they had worked for would be at risk. But he wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when they were so close. "Send word to the fleet," Voss said, his voice firm. "We can't afford to fight them head-on. We're going to break through their lines and hit their command center. It's our only shot." The Revenant and the rebel fleet changed course, diving straight into the heart of the chaos. The Zelvok reinforcements moved swiftly, but they were too late to stop the humans' momentum. Voss watched as the rebel ships, guided by the same ruthless tactics that had brought them this far, tore into the Zelvok forces, creating gaps in their defenses. It wasn't a clean fight, it never was, but it was effective. As the Revenant dove lower into the atmosphere, Voss felt the familiar hum of the ship's engines as they entered combat mode. His hands were steady on the controls, guiding the ship through a deadly dance of evasive maneuvers, avoiding blasts from the Zelvok ships while returning fire with deadly precision. The rebels followed, a coordinated wave of ships descending toward the capital. "We're almost there, Captain," Ren reported. "The command center is in sight. The Zelvok won't let us get close without a fight." "I don't plan on giving them a choice," Voss replied, his tone unwavering. The Revenant breached the outer perimeter of the Zelvok defenses, its hull shaking as the energy shields absorbed fire from the planet's planetary cannons. The rebel fleet followed in its wake, picking off any remaining patrol ships as the ground assault forces prepared for their landing. On the surface, the human-led rebellion had already begun their assault. Zara Kane, the former Earth Marine turned rebel leader, had rallied the insurgents, and they were making their way through the city, dismantling the Zelvok stronghold one building at a time. They were relentless, pushing forward with a fury born of years of oppression. "They'll know we're coming," Zara said to Voss over the comms. "But we're already inside their perimeter. It's now or never." "Hold tight, Zara," Voss said. "We'll be there soon." The Revenant landed just outside the Zelvok command center, its heavy feet shaking the ground beneath them. The crew was already suited up for battle, ready to take the fight to the heart of the Empire. Voss led his team through the ship's exit hatch, his pulse rifle in hand, his focus sharp. The team fought their way through the Zelvok defenses, blasting through walls and doorways with explosive charges. The Zelvok had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, and now, they were paying the price. "We're inside," Eric Halloway reported, his voice crackling over the comm, heading for the control room. "We'll have their fleet in disarray in minutes." Voss gave a nod, his face grim. "Keep pushing forward. We can't let them regroup." Inside the command center, the Zelvok High Command was in chaos. Their control systems were failing, their forces crumbling under the pressure of the rebels' assault. The Zelvok generals, once confident in their unshakable rule, now realized that their empire was not as invincible as they had believed. The humans had come for them, and they would stop at nothing to see them fall. As Voss and his team stormed the final corridor toward the central command room, the last line of defense emerged, a squadron of elite Zelvok warriors, their massive forms towering over the humans. These were the Emperor's personal guard, trained to face the most dangerous enemies. But they were no match for the ghosts of humanity. Voss, Zara, and the rest of the team engaged them in brutal close-quarter combat, using every trick in their arsenal to outsmart and outfight their alien adversaries. The battle was fierce, but in the end, humanity's ingenuity and determination triumphed. The Zelvok were dead, their last defenders falling one by one. With the last of the elite guards neutralized, Voss stepped into the command center, his eyes scanning the room. The holographic display flickered, showing the Zelvok fleet in disarray. "Shut it down," Voss ordered. "We end this now." Eric made quick work of the control panel, and the entire Zelvok fleet, thousands of ships, was thrown into chaos as their communications and tactical systems were severed. Their commanders had no idea what was happening, and soon, the rebel fleet would have them cornered. Outside, the battle raged on. The Zelvok were scrambling, but it was too late. The rebellion's forces moved in, securing their victory. Zalcor had fallen. The Zelvok Empire was on the brink of collapse, and humanity's vengeance had been fulfilled. Voss stood in the heart of the command center, looking down at the planet's surface. It had been a long, hard journey, but the fight was far from over. They had struck a massive blow to the Empire, but the Zelvok were not finished yet. The war was not won, but humanity had just sent a message across the stars. The ghosts of humanity were alive, and they were unstoppable. The victory on Zalcor had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The once imposing Zelvok Empire, long thought to be invincible, was now reeling. But as the dust settled on the scorched surface of the capital world, Captain Elias Voss knew that this was only the beginning. The Zelvok would not go down quietly. They were an empire built on ruthless precision and an iron grip, and they would retaliate with every resource at their disposal. The Revenant had become a symbol of hope, but it had also drawn the full attention of the Empire's remaining military might. Voss and his crew had done the impossible, they had struck at the heart of the Empire, but now, the galaxy's greatest challenge awaited them, surviving the inevitable counterattack. "We're not out of the fire yet," Mara Wren said, her voice low as she studied the latest intel. The holographic map of the galaxy pulsed with activity. "The Zelvok fleet is regrouping, and they've got reinforcements on the way. They're calling in every available ship and resource." Voss stood beside her, his expression hardened. "They won't stop until they wipe us out. We've hit them where it hurts, but they've got more than enough to strike back." "And strike back they will," Wren agreed. "The question is, can we hold them off long enough to secure a real victory?" Voss turned, his gaze sweeping across the room. His crew was focused, determined, but the fear was palpable. The Zelvok were not just enemies, they were a force to be reckoned with. But the ghosts of humanity were not to be underestimated. They had survived the fall of their homeworld, they had survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. They weren't about to stop now. "We fight," Voss said, his voice unwavering. "We keep striking. We've made too much progress to back down. We push forward, and we bring the fight to them before they can organize." The Revenant and the rebel fleet moved quickly, hitting smaller Zelvok strongholds across the galaxy. Every strike sent a clear message: humanity was not broken. They were still standing, still fighting, and still unstoppable. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the Zelvok were evolving. Their ships were getting smarter, adapting to the tactics humanity had used against them. New weapons appeared on the battlefield, hyper-advanced disruptor beams, energy shields that adapted to enemy fire, and a new breed of warships designed for speed and precision. Captain Eric Halloway said, his voice tight, "We've got a new problem. The Zelvok are using a new kind of ship, smaller, faster, but more dangerous. It's like they've learned from us." Not just learned, Ren cut in, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. They've adjusted. They're mimicking our hit-and-run tactics, using their new ships to flank us. We can't just keep fighting the same way. Voss clenched his fists. Then we adapt. We've survived this long by thinking outside the box. Let's use their own tactics against them. They want to play the game of speed? We'll show them how it's done. The Revenant became a beacon of resistance. Voss led the charge, pushing deeper into enemy territory, drawing the Zelvok forces into traps and ambushes. The rebel fleet had learned to become ghosts in the night, striking without warning, vanishing into the stars, and always staying one step ahead. But as they took more ground, the Zelvok response grew more violent. A new breed of warship appeared, massive dreadnoughts capable of wiping out entire fleets with their new energy weapons. These ships were not only bigger, they were smarter, stronger, and deadlier. The battle for survival had become a desperate race. Humanity had been living on borrowed time, using every ounce of their ingenuity to survive. But now, the Zelvok were fighting back with the full might of their empire. "We need to end this," Voss said, standing at the center of the war room, his voice grim. "We've been bleeding the empire, but now they've got too much power. We've got one shot at this." Ren nodded, her eyes narrowing as she sifted through the latest intel. "They're gathering in one place. The Zelvok leadership is regrouping at their last remaining fortress world, Kael'Kor. If we hit them there, we could cripple their command structure for good." Voss' eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we go there. Full assault. We hit them harder than they ever expected. No more playing defense. We're ending this now." The journey to Kael'Kor was perilous. The Zelvok were waiting for them, and they had prepared. The final battle would not be easy, it would be the largest engagement the galaxy had ever seen. The rebel fleet, joined by new allies from across the stars, prepared for the most significant battle of their lives. As the fleet approached Kael'Kor, Voss stood before his crew, his voice steady and commanding. "This is it. We've been fighting for this moment since we started. We've fought for every inch of ground, for every life we've saved, for the chance to see humanity stand tall again. But we can't stop now. If we do, everything we've worked for will be lost. This is for Earth. This is for every soul who's ever stood against tyranny." The crew of the Revenant stood silent, their resolve clear. They would see this fight through to the end. The war for the galaxy was about to come to a head, and the ghosts of humanity would not stop until the Zelvok Empire was shattered for good. The final assault on Kael'Kor, the heart of the Zelvok Empire, was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The planet loomed ahead, surrounded by a ring of Zelvok warships, their guns primed and ready. The rebel fleet, led by the Revenant, was poised to strike, but the odds were staggering. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Captain Elias Voss stood at the helm of the Revenant, his face set in a grim mask of determination. His crew, the last remnants of humanity's military might, were prepared for what would be the final confrontation. Every member had fought for this moment, pushed their limits to the edge, and now, the time had come. "We've been up against the impossible before," Voss said, his voice steady over the comms to his crew. "And we've come out victorious. We will win this battle, or we die fighting. No more running. No more waiting. Today, we take back the galaxy." The crew of the Revenant erupted in a cheer, the sound of their resolve echoing throughout the ship. It was a roar of defiance, a final stand for the survival of the human race. Every member of the fleet knew the cost of failure, extinction. But they were prepared to pay it, for they had nothing left to lose. The assault began with a thunderous roar as the rebel fleet charged toward the Zelvok defenses. The first wave of fighter ships cut through the blackness of space, their engines blazing like fireflies in the night. Behind them, the bulk of the fleet followed, weapons locked and ready. The Zelvok were waiting, but they could never have anticipated the ferocity with which humanity would meet them. "Deploy the traps," Voss ordered. "We need to create a gap." The Revenant released its array of explosive devices, old tactics, but effective. The Zelvok warships, once so confident in their technological superiority, were caught off guard. Explosions rocked their lines, creating holes in their defenses. The human fleet surged forward, exploiting the weakness, with Voss leading the charge. Mara-Ren guided the Revenant expertly through the chaos, dodging Zelvok fire and delivering devastating counterattacks. The Zelvok dreadnoughts fired their massive energy beams, sending shockwaves through space, but the rebel ships were too nimble, too unpredictable. They darted through the fire, closing the distance. Meanwhile, Zara Kane, leading the ground forces on Kelkor, had begun her own assault. The human soldiers, hardened by years of fighting for survival, stormed the enemy fortress with ruthless efficiency. They fought tooth and nail, pushing back wave after wave of Zelvok forces, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. "The command center is within reach," Zara reported. "We're breaking through their defenses. Prepare for the final push." As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Zelvok were losing control. The rebel forces had crippled their fleet's coordination and were steadily advancing toward the planet's surface. But the Zelvok were not without their final ace, their emperor. Kelkor was the last stronghold of the Zelvok's leadership, and their emperor, Zar Vokal, had prepared for this moment. His personal warship, a massive, heavily armored vessel, emerged from the planet's atmosphere, a beacon of the Empire's final resistance. The ship was a fortress, bristling with weapons and protected by shields stronger than any the rebels had encountered before. "We've got company," Eric Halloway warned, pointing at the massive warship now bearing down on them. Voss gritted his teeth. "Prepare for the fight of our lives. We're taking that ship down. This ends today." The Revenant surged forward, locking onto the enemy warship with all the firepower it could muster. The Zelvok Emperor's ship returned fire with devastating force, sending blasts that ripped through space. The shields of the Revenant flickered and sparked under the assault, but it held. "Barely." "Captain," Ren shouted, her voice tight with strain, "our shields are failing. We can't take much more of this." "We don't need shields," Voss said, his voice ice-cold. "We just need to get close enough to strike." The Revenant made a daring move, closing the distance with the enemy ship, darting through fire and debris. Voss's fingers danced over the controls, issuing commands to his crew to fire their weapons at the right moment. "Now!" Voss shouted, and the Revenant unleashed everything it had. Every weapon on the ship fired at once, plasma bolts, ion cannons, torpedoes, all aimed directly at the vulnerable core of the Zelvok Emperor's warship. The blasts hit their mark. The explosion was deafening, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Zelvok ship disintegrated in a fiery blaze, and with it, the Empire's last hope. The human fleet moved in, finishing off the remaining Zelvok ships in the area. Back on Kelkor's surface, Zara and her team stormed the command center. With the Emperor's death, the Zelvok forces had lost all will to fight. The rebels poured in, securing the fortress and bringing the Zelvok leadership to its knees. "It's over," Zara said, breathless from the battle. "We've won." Voss, standing aboard the Revenant, looked down at the planet below. The last remnants of the Zelvok Empire were falling apart, their forces scattered and broken. Humanity had faced the impossible and had emerged victorious. The galaxy would never be the same. "Humanity is still here," Voss said, his voice resolute. "We've earned our place in this galaxy. And we'll make sure no one ever forgets it." As the rebel fleet turned its sights to the stars, a new era had begun. An era where humanity stood as the ultimate force in the galaxy. The Zelvok Empire had fallen. The ghosts of humanity had risen. And they were ready for whatever came next.